Welcome to In or Out, the European Ultimate Federation's show about the club season ranking review. I'm Rob Vasudevan, and we got a great show to wrap up what happened at the Elite Invite this past weekend and how that affected all of the rankings. It's going to be a great show. We got Paula Boss to come discuss the rankings with me. They are a great athlete and player involved in many levels of the sport and are now also a member of the UF competition committee. So they will be on the show later. Before we get into that, though, a few little pieces of housekeeping in that couple things we need to mention. One is a slight correction, two corrections that happened to the rankings. One of which is that the expected score in the matchup tab was actually not very good before this weekend. Shout out to Saskia Chambiel from Jet Set Louvre for seeing that there were some inaccuracies in the way we were doing the expected score. For those of you nerds out there, I was stupidly kind of fitting all the scores linearly and then doing a sort of linear best fit to get the expected score, but it's totally a non-linear function, so that doesn't work. So I just kind of brute forced it now and have every single point from 8.01 up to 14.99 for the losing score, and considered every single one and just find the nearest neighbor now. So now it's actually a much more accurate reverse calculation for the expected score. So now that might be a bit different than how you had seen it before on the matchup tab. So sorry about that, and thanks to Saskia for pointing it out. We fixed that up. Another change, there were a number of scores that were not counted from Tom's tourney in the last show. They've been added, and additionally to that, there was one spring tour result in the mixed division that I think was like a 12-11 score that was actually supposed to be 14-12. So we've adjusted that. It didn't change where any teams were positionally, but some of their ratings changed a little bit. So there's a few corrections there. Another couple of notes from the EUF for the EUCS, since we got some questions on a number of things. One is about going to an EUF approved tournament. So not one of the EUF tournaments like Elite Invite or Summer Tour, Spring Tour, but maybe an approved tournament like Windmill or Tom's or Vienna Spring Break or Nationals or whatever. The question was, can you go to that tournament with a roster of people that are outside your master roster as long as you don't play them in the games that are actually EUCS games? So maybe you bring a few extra players, and could you use them on any time you play a non-EUCS team? And the answer is yes. This algorithm cares about the data of the actual games. So if you want to bring some extra players, then that's fine. But if those players even accidentally play during an EUCS game, and you can't like pick and choose, oh, we want this to be EUCS or not. If you go to an EUF approved tournament and you play an EUCS team, it is an EUCS game. So if one of those extra players plays on there and somebody notices it, you and that player will be disqualified from the EUCF. So be very careful with this, but it is allowed. So if there are more questions about that, please feel free to put them in the chat. Another couple updates. Rosters are now in the app. I'll show you that when we get through into the rankings, so you can see people's teams' master rosters and event rosters. The transfer window is opening this week on the 15th of May, so that's the first time that teams will be able to trade teams. We can go into those rules maybe a bit later in the show. And lastly, a few notes on wildcards. There was a question as to whether if a team wins a wild card, do they still need to get that 10-game minimum? Yes. Wildcard teams, whether you win a summer tour or an elite invite wildcard, you have to have 10 games, no matter what, to go to the EUCF. That makes it fair for everybody. Everybody has to make sure they get those games in, regardless of how you get into the tournament. So if you don't have your 10 games in, you're not going to go to the EUCF. So make sure, even if you're a wildcard team, that you do that. Another question on wildcards. If a wildcard wins another wildcard, what happens? So let's say some team, Lemmings, for example, I think they might be the only one this applies to, wins one elite invite, and they go to win a summer tour. What happens? Well, the other wild card just goes away. So that will basically become another ranking bid. We're not going to give a wild card to the next place team at any tournament. If it's only the wild card, you have to win the tournament to get the wild card. If the same team has it twice, it just goes to another ranking bid. So I see a question here in the chat. Can we pick what days count at Windmill? I don't know if I'd want to gamble my season on a Saturday morning game. No, you cannot. Windmill is an EUF approved tournament. So if you go as EUF ranking, you have to count that any game you play against another EUCS team will count, and you cannot affect choose what games do what. Another wild card question: do you take the seeding based on where you finished in the 16 games that qualified? Yes or no? So a wild card does not affect the seeding. The seeding for EUCF will be based entirely on the ranking. So a wild card gets you in, but does not give you any seeding. Okay, I think that's it for housekeeping questions for now. So I'm going to bring in Paula Boss, who's a Dutch national team player for a long time, just played lead invite with Jaka, and like I said, is now part of the EUF competition committee. So let's bring Paula onto the show. Hello, Paula. How are you doing? How was your weekend?
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm very good. How are you?
Good, good. How'd you enjoy the weekend with Jaka at Elite Invite?
Yeah, it was very fun. I think we had a great time. Unfortunate loss in the final, but I think overall we are very happy with the weekend.
I'm curious how you all treat this. I mean, it's a kind of a strange tournament in a way, in that super elite high level, but super early in the season, and it matters. It can matter really a lot for where you're going to be seated at UCF, but at the same time, you kind of want to maybe test more things out, test more lines out. How did Yaka approach this tournament with all those complications in the air?
Yeah, I think we talked about it before the tournament started, and like they explained, the captains explained how the ranking worked, and that it was important that we do well in every game, and that all the points count. And then in terms of game management throughout the weekend, I think we played mostly only with our two lines system, like in our regular system. And in some games, some players on a certain line can play a bit more, and in other games, other players play a bit more, for example. And I think only against maybe Mooncap or Iceni in the first half, when we were not doing great, we put a few, like we called Makina lines, out there. Or maybe it was against Jinx the first game. We were behind 4-1. So we pushed a little bit there in the beginning of the game so that we could kind of play out most of the rest of the games in our line system, because we do want to win. But I think it's also really good to build like the connections in the lines and to involve the more younger players and to give them a lot of confidence. So we were making sure that we also did that this tournament.
Cool. Can you? I mean, you don't have to give away too much, but I think it's well known that Yaka is a bit different in how they do lines. You mentioned that you don't play O and D lines. You have two separate lines. Can you talk a bit about the mentality of that? I think this is very unique for an ultimate team, and you've played on other ultimate structures. So how do you find this system compared to other systems?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think both systems really have their benefits or its benefit, and I think that yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, oh, we should really do O and D line, and sometimes I think, oh, the system is so great because it. I think both systems have a different like upside or something, and I think the way that our lines are balanced and like the two lines are a bit different in terms of strengths, which I think makes it hard to play against for other teams as well. Because how I feel about as a defender playing against the same offense line for an entire game, and then most of the time matching up against the same player, you kind of learn the routine of that line, you learn the routine of those players, and it makes it maybe easier to defend. But with a different line setup, it's kind of your D line can never really get the rhythm of the other O line because it might change throughout the game, which players are out there on the field. So I think that's a huge benefit as well. So I'm happy with it most of the times, but yeah, I think it has its strength and weaknesses, but for us, I
Yep.
think it's a strength. Yeah.
Seems to be working pretty well. We'll see. I'll see how
Yeah.
it gets into the end of the season. I am curious before we go into the rankings, though, how you as an athlete, so take your EUF hat off for a second and keep the Yaka hat on, are finding this new structure, this whole new EUCS system with the rankings, and instead of having an EUCR and kind of a different season planning. What are your impressions so far?
I actually am super excited for how it's like going from where it started 2 years ago and where it's gonna go. Because I think 2 years when they announced the first elite invite, I thought this is perfect. A tournament that is only for club teams, that is really there. You know, you go there, you play, you eat, you sleep, and you don't pay unnecessary money for all these events or all these extras that you don't really benefit from if you're going to a tournament to play competitively. Um, So I was really liking that. And then this year, when they also took the like tournaments like Toms and Windmill as ranking tournaments, not sure how I felt about that. But then I think teams are starting to notice that maybe the safest way to go about the season is to go to two EUCS events, because that gets you 12 guaranteed games. And I'm assuming that next year more teams are going to do that, and that will give a little bit back to what the atmosphere and like how to use tournaments as Toms and Windmill. So overall, I think it's super great to have like a separation between serious tournaments and more fun tournaments, or then tournaments that you work for ranking, and maybe tournaments that you go to work on your team and to work on your line. So I'm really curious also to see what teams are going to do next year.
Yeah, I talked to a few teams that are maybe on the bubble that I think opted not to go to summer tour, and I think they're kicking themselves because they're realizing, oh, we could. It's hard to control whether we get 16th or 17th, but if we go to summer tour, that would give us a chance to get a wild card and have a little bit more in our control. And I think summer. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think our spring tour was a bit more well attended than summer tour. That's kind of a normal thing for Europeans, I think, taking holidays in August. But I think next year we'll get more if we still have the same wildcard system, which you'll be part of the conversations this summer when we decide what to do about next year. But if we have the same wildcard system, I would guess that we'll have a few more summer tour teams opting for summer tour with the way things went this year.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay, with that said, let's start diving into the rankings. So I'll pull up my screen here. And we'll start with the mixed division, which I think was a wild division in the EUCS, in the Elite Invite this past weekend. Leamington Lemmings won the wild card. So if you see on the ranking app, teams that win wild cards are just here in bold yellow, meaning they're in the ECF no matter what. Of course, as I said at the beginning of the show, as long as they get their 10 games, which Lemmings only has 6 right now, but I have seen that Lemmings is going to a summer tour. So they'll get their 12 games no matter what. So they're definitely in. But yeah, it's interesting that after all said and done, TC Tauscher, Glasgow, and Mosquitoes, who were not at the Elite Invite, end up at the top because I think so. If looked at the connections with how it was working here, I think it was Nullagt and Deep Space that were the only teams that played. So you see here, Nullagt is kind of like a center point, and then if I pull these teams away from Deep Space, let's get the teams out there. It's a little messier over here. But yeah, you can kind of see that Deep Space is another connection point to the Elite Invite teams. Then this was one spring tour, and this was another spring tour. And it seems that the way Nullagt, I think they did a bit better at Elite Invite relatively than they did at spring tour, and maybe Deep Space the same. So somehow these teams, when that comparison works out, end up higher up over those teams than the teams at Elite Invite were. So since those teams didn't win, yeah, this is what we end up with. So TC Tauscher from Munich first, Glasgow Mosquitoes after that, Lemmings, who won the Elite Invite, sitting there at fourth. Deep Space from London, Seskidistis, who lost in the final, they're at sixth. Then we got Padova Rangers, Pelt from Ireland, Puk from France, Reading, Nullagt, Heroes from Hungary, Skythis from Poland, Malmö from Sweden, Mancho and Tartu. So Malmo, Mancho, and Tartu are not in that safe zone because if the wild cards go to teams outside the top 16, they might not be safe. But if they do, then they are safe. And then just outside the rankings, rounding out the top 20, we got Disconnection, BN1, Frub, and Out. So people were asking last week, if you go to Elite Invite, are you guaranteed a spot in? Is it like unfair because those teams get an advantage? You see, the way Disconnection and Tartu played, they didn't play that well at Elite, and yeah, Tartu's barely in, but Disconnection's out, so it doesn't guarantee you a spot. Paula, what are your first thoughts looking at this list of teams here in the mixed division?
Yeah, that's quite wild actually to see. And also, I think kind of nice. Like, we also had this discussion, is it unfair or somewhat unfair that some teams get to play the Elite Invite and does it give them an advantage? But this kind of shows that maybe it doesn't necessarily.
Just
But
win
I'm
your
very
games.
curious.
Win your
Yeah,
games and you'll
yeah.
be fine.
I'm very curious if there's one of the top, what is it, two teams I think that are, or three teams that didn't go to Elite Invite. What
Yeah.
is their connection to the teams from Elite Invite? Did they play against any teams from Elite Invite? And how did those games turn out for them.
So we'll see here. Glasgow, they're second. They played nope, no teams from Elite Invite, uh, and then what was it? TFC Tauscher. They did beat Deep Space, if I remember correctly. Yeah, they beat Deep Space 15-12, so they have a 3-point win over them. And then Mosquitoes was the last team that was in, and they also beat Deep Space by one. So they beat the Elite Invite team. So yeah, that kind of makes sense that they're above Deep Space, and I guess they were more above Deep Space than Lemmings were on average. So that's why they ended up above them.
It's very interesting. Like also in terms of how many points then they get, because you said that a universe win is about 180 points,
So
and
you'll get 125 points above your opponent. So if you see Mosquitoes, they have that was Mosquitoes that did that. Um, they had so that, but it turns out that game over Deep Space wasn't even their best game. This 15-8 win over BN1 was actually a higher rated game. So yes, that was just 125 points above, but they had games that were even better than that. So it all works out a bit strangely, and yeah. So go out and win your games, and yeah, that's all I could say.
do you think it matters that, for example, the games at Elite Invite are more competitive, so the scores are kind of closer together, even though all the teams are good? If that's the like first tournament that you play, you don't go so high in the ranking points because maybe you didn't play so many games that were with a huge score difference. Versus maybe if you go to a spring invite and you blow out a game or you win 15-7 or 15-8, those differences are just bigger, which gets you more points, even if the teams
Yeah,
are
so
not
so
among
it's
the top
it's
eight.
it's there's push and pull on that because winning big can be helpful, but if that team that you win big by ends up being really bad, then that's not that helpful. So winning 15-7 against a terrible team is not that helpful. There are slight advantages. I know there was an article written by Ultiworld a while back. You can look at it about bias in the USAU algorithm, and it's something we're considering looking at. I think if I remember correctly, you're slightly advantaged if you play teams that are slightly worse than you, and you're disadvantaged if you play teams that are slightly better than you. And then it goes the other way around for like way better or way worse. You want to play teams that are way better than you, and you want to teams that are way worse than you. But if it's a close team, your advantage to play ones that are it's your advantage to play slightly worse or slightly better. There's like some slight benefit there, but it's impossible to know ahead of time what those teams are going to be like. So that's not something that's that easy to game. And I also saw the analysis and I wasn't super convinced of all the math that was there, but maybe we can have some people look at that. We're always looking for if you some math nerds out there that think there are ways that we can improve the algorithm to account for the things that exactly Paolo's mentioning here to make sure that it's fair regardless of what team you're facing. We're definitely willing to look at ways to improve it. We went with the USAU one this year because that's kind of tried and true and it's been used for a while, but definitely looking for ways to improve next year if anyone has any. Yeah, that was a long-winded way to say it depends to to your question. So what else? So let's take a look at the borders. I always like to check out how close are the margins at the place that counts. We got Sky This and Malmö as our matchup here. So Sky This and Malmö. Is there any interesting comparisons between the two? Oh, so they actually played each other. And you can see that Sky This actually won both those games by close. So that definitely makes a huge difference. If those games had gone the other way, I could definitely see that Malmo would be up front. So this universe point I think counted for a whole lot for Sky This against Malmo. You can see some of their mutual opponents as well. They both played DTU 14-7, 15-7. That's about the same. And then a 15-12 versus a 12-11. This 15-12 win over Nulakt, who was at the Elite Invite and I think did quite okay there, also was probably a very good result for Sky This. So you can see here a little bit as to how these two teams compare and why Sky This gets the slight benefit over Malmo. And if those wildcards go below the top 16, that would have been the difference right now. So let's take a look at the other. Oh, this one's rough. It's Tartu and Disconnection, both teams that were at the Elite Invite. And Tartu from Estonia and Disconnection. They have a rating difference of 4.51. That's extremely close. That's like ridiculously close, which actually seems quite weird given that Disconnection did beat Tartu 15-8, which is much more. I mean, like I said, a universe point win is 125 points. So this is way, way, way less than that. But disconnection won by a ton. Maybe if we look at the mutual opponents, some things will make a little bit more sense. So Tartu did play closer to Deep Space, only losing by 2 when disconnection lost by 5. Tartu beat Monchot 15-11, whereas disconnection lost to Monchot 10-12. Tartu lost to Reading by 1. Disconnection lost by 5. Tartu lost to Seski by 4, and they also lost by 4. So you can see in these 3 games that Tartu did better in all those 3 matchups. So even though there's that one game where surely disconnection got a way better score than Tartu did, in the way it all worked out the other way, Tartu still edges just ahead. So these are the margins we're working with for, who might or might not get into EUCF. Very, very brutal stuff, but yeah, those games at the EUCS tournaments count a lot. Yeah, what are your thoughts here on mixed? I do. It looks like there's quite a lot of GB teams that are in the mix. Because one thing we did note last week is that the one drawback to this system is we don't guarantee regional diversity. It could be that one country that's really strong ends up with a lot of teams, and we see 4 GB teams in the top 10. But overall, pretty diverse outside of that, I would say. Anything else you want to dig into mixed before we go to another division, Paula?
I think I'm good. It was hard to follow the mixed division this weekend because we were
Yeah.
always warming up when they were playing, and when their games were actually like going towards the end, we were not really there for it. So I'm also at a loss who, like, I know who won obviously, who was in the final, but anything else below that, I have no idea who played who and what was the score and stuff.
Yeah.
So maybe I should have prepared a bit better for this
That's
one.
okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. You can also just treat it like questions. Just ask me things if you're curious about whatever, and then I'll try to answer them. I'll just take a look here at the evolution plot, looking at how the top 16 has looked, who left, who got knocked out. So last week, you can see that BN1, Frub, and Out were in the top 16, and they got knocked out. Here's a brand new team, Tartu Turbulence. They came in for the first time. Nuloct in for the first time, and Lemmings in for the first time. We also see this is Manchot, who were at the Elite Invite, and I think they had one game, I think against either Puk or Seskidistas, can't remember. They had one game before this tournament in the whole ranking from French Nationals, and then they seemed to do pretty well there, but after Elite Invite have come down to earth a bit and knocked themselves down to 15th. Other than that, the rankings moving around a little bit more, but those are the big movers from the last week.
So what are the mixed events kind of remaining in this season? I don't know how many teams, like how many ECS teams are going to Windmill, for example, and then of course you have the summer tours. But are there any other tournaments that these mixed teams are going to be competing at that we can follow?
So I do know that coming up this weekend is Talampaya in Switzerland. I think there's going to be quite some mixed teams there. Turkish Mixed Nationals is also happening then. There's UK Wind Farm. I don't know if there are any mixed teams going there, or if that's just open to women's. I can't remember off the top of my head. The DFV mix, so that's a German like internal mixed tournament. So there's quite a lot of EUCS mixed teams in Germany. They'll play each other there, an internal one. Let's take a look at June. Yeah, nothing really here. UK regionals, of course, the UK teams will be there. Windmill will be there. And yeah, I think it's mainly Windmill and then the summer tours aside from the Talampaya. I think Talampaya next week will have quite some results for mixed. But yeah. So, okay. I think that'll do it for mixed. Oh, I can just quickly recap what the ranking was at Elite Invite since it was last week. Lemmings did win, as we mentioned before, beating Seskidistas on Universe in the final. Nice game. Deep Space ended up, last year's Euro champs, ended up third. Nuloct in fourth. Reading over Tartu in the 5-6 game, and then Monchot beating Disconnection in the 7-8 game. John's got a question in the chat, but I'll go to that one later on. We'll do the rankings first, and then I'll get to that question at the end of the show. Okay, let's go to Open. Next division.
I just heard from Nemo that Talampaya, there are not going to be any registered teams there. So it's really going to be
Okay, so
those
it's just
two events that you
Windmill and
named.
the summer
So
tours.
yeah.
Okay, Open. I think no surprise to any people who's sitting there at the top. It will be the Mooncatchers. They have gone 12-0 at their 2 tournaments and one Elite Invite. They haven't lost a game. Makes sense that they're at the top. Also have the wild card. And this might be a surprise to some people, but Clapham manages to get second place even though they went to Tom's tourney, they played two tournaments. They went to Tom's tourney with a D line plus captains team, and then they went to Elite Invite, but had a wedding during the weekend, so we're missing a lot of their top players there. Still managing to go 10-2 in all their EUCS games with that with that set of teams they brought out, and still managed to get second place, which is very scary if I was an open division team to see that like Clapham at in a weakened state is still the second best team in Europe. Could be very, very scary to see what they look like at full strength later this season.
Yeah, that's
Lafort,
very impressive from them. Like at both tournaments to get such good results with not your full squad against other teams that are there with their entire squad. I think it's really impressive. I saw
yeah.
some of the Clapham games how they managed on Saturday. It was really interesting. Some very short pulls, just trying not to have to play defense in the full field. And I think they really like had a good plan for it and they executed it well. So I think that's quite impressive from them.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think of that strategy? The little short pull. I think it definitely caught some teams by surprise. It's similar to like that Japanese strategy. They usually do the full pull and then wait for the team to come to halfway and then start playing.
Yeah, I thought it was really smart. I think especially if your players are very smart and they're really good at like kind of a poachy end zone kind of defense, and if you really got that down, then you surprise teams and then you put pressure on them because they have only a short field to go, so they should be able to score, but there's actually less space because you cannot really throw any longs anymore. So if that's really part of your game, then yeah, and then you're just there right in front of the end zone with like five huge guys in front of you. I think, yeah, as a the other team, I would be quite nervous.
Given how well it worked, I'm curious if they're going to use that strategy when they have a full squad just to try it out a few times in a game. We'll see. We'll see
That
what
would be
Clapham
fun.
does with that later on this season. So coming up behind them, La Fota, who I think had they did lose a couple games. They had a loss to Wall City, and they lost to Gentle. So I think people might have expected them to go a bit lower, but they have a lot of really good results. They actually have 7 losses on the season, but still their average score high enough to get them in third place. Um, All City coming in fourth from Berlin. They weren't in the rankings before. They just started lead invite. Them and Gentle also, both new teams in the ranking. Gentle having a very good weekend, I think surprising a lot of people by making the final. Maybe feel a little shafted the fact that they didn't get higher in the rankings, but you can see that they are 3-3. So those pool play losses that didn't count for the elite invite, but did count, will still count for the rankings all the same. 3SB, who's only played their spring tour at 6-0. You can see that 6-0. I think they were quite high in the rankings before. They're getting diminished because they weren't against the top teams. Still high enough to qualify though. One Tribe, the other team from Bologna, we mentioned they had that 15-9 win over La Fota in Italian Nationals. That's definitely helping them, but they're sitting at seventh. Ranelagh from Ireland, Chalk from France, Chevron Action Flash, who was also at the Elite Invites, are now 4-5. Still need one more game, Chevy, before we can qualify. Costa Rica Grandes from Rimini. Then you got XVI and from Dublin, Bristol from the UK, Hrutz sitting at 14th. Open, Franken, and Jet Set at the cutoff just above Quixotes. So, yeah, some interesting stuff here. Bad Skid is no good, and Ketchup just outside to round out the top 20. Yeah, Paolo, your first thoughts looking at this open ranking?
Yeah, so I'm assuming that most teams that went to Elite Invite are in this top 16. I saw Alba there a bit below, and then also Jet Set might be the two ones that are kind of on the edge, but I think the other 6 teams like quite solidly in the top or the
Yeah.
middle of the ranking there, right?
Yeah, you can see Jet Set sitting here with 3 wins and 10 losses and still in the top 16. But if you go and see their lead invite results, they were actually quite close to all the top teams. They did lose most of them, but they had really close games against them. So that's why they ended up they're ending up still up here. But they're hanging on by a thread just above Quixotes though.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you said, Alba sitting here at 22nd, so it's not a guarantee that you're going to rank highly. If you come in
No.
and lose your games by a lot, like Alba did, you will be knocked out of contention.
Yeah, and then of course it's gonna be like exciting to see what, for example, Gut is gonna do, and maybe also is no good, who is kind of like also an established team in Europe or has been over the last few years. So I'm curious to see what tournaments are they gonna play still, what kind of games are they gonna get, and how are they gonna do there, and is that gonna be enough to get them a bit higher in the ranking there?
Yeah, the two examples you mentioned, I know, are not signed up for summer tour, so I think two teams might be regretting that decision because could give themselves a little more control now. I do think I don't know what else Isno can do because they're not at Windmill. There are still a few more tournaments out there, and they will have French nationals. So maybe if they can get like a huge win against Chalk, that can boost them up a little bit. But just one more game, they already have 15 games in the rankings, so one more game is just a small part of that average. You can't do that much. So I would say it's quite challenging for Is No Good to get up in that top 16. Should also remember that in previous years before this one, we had 24 teams in the Open Division. This is the first year we're going that down to 16. So there will be some teams that are typically EUCF level that just won't be in because we've made the cutoff a bit harsher for that division to make it equitable with all the other ones this year.
Good choice on the equity part, but I think that's going to be a tough pill to swallow for some teams probably.
Yeah, it was more that just if we used to have like really small women's and mixed, and now that women's and mixed can field 16, that's
Yeah.
what we can handle with field size. So, yeah, but that just makes it all the more difficult to get in, which will make it all the more of an elite tournament at the end of the year. And we're plenty of opportunities to play European wise before then. But if you want to play UCF, you got to be one of the 16 best. Let's see here. What do I see in this ranking? Yeah, for me, like this Clapham result, I want to just take a look at them for a second and where their best games and worst games were. So their worst game here was their 14-11 loss to Chalk at Tom's Tourney. Um, and seems like, yeah, they beat Hardfish at Tom's Tourney by apparently not enough. That was their next worst result. Um, so yeah, those are some of their worst scores. And then I guess some of their best scores, they actually Tom's Tourney, they beat Chalk 12-8. And then this win over Gentle ended up, yeah, maybe a 15-11 win over Gentle. People wouldn't think is that great a result before this weekend, but given how they ended up playing up this weekend, that turned into a huge result for them. So quite a big spread. If I look here, curious if you look at Tom's Tourney versus Elite, it seems like they actually played a little better at Elite than they did at Tom's Tourney with that weekend squad. So this wedding, the team of people that weren't invited to the wedding, actually doing quite well on the team compared to the D line plus captains. So they can give each other crap about that. Um, let's see any other teams that are worth investigating. Yeah, La Fota with a 10-7 record and still being this high. Um, so yeah, that one tribe result that we talked about
How did they
losing
get so
15.
many games?
Yeah, so they played
They
elite.
went to Spring Invite and
Yes,
Elite. Yeah.
they've done Tom's Tourney, Spring Tour, and Elite Invite, and one game of Italian Nationals so far.
Yeah.
So they've got plenty of games in the system. And you see that their losses are their worst games, but yeah, it's a close loss to Wall City, close loss to Moon. So that loss to Bristol they had at Tom's by one that shocked a lot of people. Lost to Gentle, but then yeah, they do have a lot of good wins as well. So yeah, on average, still a very strong team and still strong enough to get top three, which I think that's quite impressive.
Yeah.
All right. So should we get to the division you actually care about, Paula? Is that what we should be doing now?
Yes, the most
Oh wait,
exciting one.
we have to first look at the
Oh,
at the cutoffs. Let's do Costa Rica versus XVI. Just see how close those teams are. Who's in, who's out. So rating difference of 18.11. Again, very very close. That's a tenth of a universe points over them. Um, if I see that they have any games in common, they have not played each other. They have both played Chalk. Costa Rica lost 8-11 and XVI lost 7-13. So you can see a bit of a head-to-head win for Costa Rica over XVI, but with this narrow of a margin, it's about all the games averaged together. Jet Set and Quixotes, that should be interesting to look at because I think they were at the same spring tour. So I'm curious if they met each other there. So nope, they didn't play each other at Spring Tour. We see some mutual opponents here. Jet Set beating Bristol 14-10, whereas Quixotes beat them 11-13. And then Jet Set losing to Crut 8-15 and Quixotes beating them 11-8. But so on these results alone, it looks like Quixotes should have slightly the upper hand. But of course, it's about all the games, and then altogether, we have a rating difference of 28.15, which is closer than 14.99 to 0. So we'll see how things shake out. It's going to be really close with those teams at the margins. I I don't know. Actually, here's something that I haven't mentioned yet. I now have, well, I did mention at the beginning of the show, but we now have the roster tab, which if you go to a team, you can click on roster, and then you can actually look at their whole master roster. Oh, let's give it a second to load, as well as all their event rosters, and you can see which events the team is signed up for. So you can see here that Jet Set is signed up for Summer Tour at Chambéry. And I'm curious if Quixote is signed up for anything else this season so far. They're also at Summer Tour at Chambéry. So those are the two teams on the margins of each other, and they'll be at the same tournament where they'll be able to fight. So that should be an interesting thing to watch if the rankings stay the same by the end of the season. It'll be an important tournament over there in France. Okay.
Yeah, it's gonna be very exciting.
Now, Paula, now we can finally go to
Yeah,
the women's division and
let's
see
go.
where you all ended up.
Second, I'm okay with that. I didn't
Don't.
look at it before the show. I wanted to be surprised.
So I think that makes sense, right? Jinx went 6-0. They're on top. I think you lost to Jinx twice, and that's it.
Yeah.
Beating all your other teams. Of course, you didn't have a head-to-head result against Shout, so might have been iffy to see whether you were on top of them or they were on top of you. You see, there's a rating difference of about 30 points, so still pretty close. I think a lot of people have been calling these the big three in the women's division, but still there's a lot of really good teams outside of those three that I think can contend. And I think not just sucking up to you, but that the women's division is going to be the most exciting division this year. There's going to be a lot of teams that are going to be challenging for those quarterfinal spots, and I think every quarterfinal, if one team kind of lets off a little bit, there can be some crazy upsets. So really looking forward to seeing how the UCF shapes up for the women's division. Rounding out their rankings here, so we got Jinx, Yaka, Shout, 3SB with their 4-0. I think that was all from Vienna Spring Break. So haven't played an official EUCS tournament yet, but still doing really well with those 4 wins there. Krut in 5th. East Block 4-2, having I think crazy weekend with a win over Shout and then a loss 15-8 under Moon Cup and all over the place, this East Block team. Moon Cup just under them, which, again, beating East Block 15-8, but still ending up under them. But I think Moon Cup's spring tour results weren't that strong, so probably pulling them down a little bit. Iceni rounds out the top 8. Ketchup from Graz, Austria at 9th. Bristol at 10th. Then we got Fabulous from Switzerland at 11th. LMU from London at 12th. Troubles from Poland, and that's the safety cutoff. Under that, we have Jet Set Love, Box Vienna, and Smog in the sort of potential bid region where they could get a bid, could not get a bid, depends on how the wild cards go. Then rounding out the top 20, we have Woof from Bruges, Tequila Boom Boom from Rimini, Seagulls from Hamburg, and Sharks from Barcelona with just, I think, 3 games from the Vienna Spring Break, but haven't had any other games there. So if Sharks, I know, are playing Summer Tour, but please get your 1 game before Summer Tour in, so that in case you make that top 16, we don't have to disqualify you. You still need 1 more to get there. All right, Paula, women's ranking. What do you want to know? What do you want to
Yeah,
look
I'm
into?
curious to see what made 3SB get over Gut, for example, because did they play any teams that were at Elite Invite, or are they completely disconnected from the rest of the teams, or like how does that
So it
work?
looks like they only have big wins over teams that weren't at Elite Invite. So 12-7 over Ketchup, who I think has had quite a decent season so far. Um, if you look at Ketchup, I think they have. How did they do against Krutz? They lost to Krutz by a bit. But yeah, so 3SB beat them. Um, I thought they had some better results here against some of the top teams, but it looks like they also, don't have the best results. But 3SB beat them 12-7, so that's a pretty decent result, which I guess is pretty close to Krutz 13-8. Then beating these other teams, I think beating Sharks 15-4, quite a big win against a team that's not that low down, doing okay, and Troubles 12-7. But I think this is a bit disconnected still. I mean, the only connection is through Ketchup for the two teams, and they have quite similar results there. So if you go to, I think that's it, right? So if we go to 3SB and Hrut, um, this is a bigger difference. So 15 to 13.61 difference, and only sitting there. Yeah, so the matchups 12-7 13-8, and then a 15-11 win over Fabulous, whereas Crit only had a 13-11 win over Fabulous. So there are a couple mutual results there. And yeah, but with 3SB, I would say they only have 4 games, so it's not that accurate. So that it could change quite a bit, I think, once they get their full 10 games in.
Yeah, that makes sense. Are they going to I think they were on the windmill, probably for ranking, I assume, if they're not going to a spring tour.
Um,
Summer tour,
they
sorry.
have to go to a summer tour because you have to go to one thing. So they are listed as counting windmill and also going to summer tour. So they are playing those events. Yep. So Crit versus 3SB could be a nice one there to see in windmill, see if they can steal each other's ranking,
Yeah.
see how they really match up there.
So let's look at Yaka. I'm excited.
Let's look at Yaka. Let's see. Oh, just looking here, yeah, it looks like you only have a lead invite at the moment, so you're gonna have to get some your games in some other way.
Yeah,
Actually,
we're
what's
going
Yaka
to
planning to do for that?
London invite,
Ah,
and we're hoping that we're gonna get enough games there. I already know that Acene is not sending their master roster because they have some players on the mixed team, but hopefully the other English teams are not as affected by that team going to the same tournament. So we
mm-hmm,
are hoping that we get our remaining 4 games there.
mm-hmm.
And if not, then we have to find another team who is also in trouble and just find a way to play 1 or 2 games against them. I think,
Are you the only French team in the EUCS in women's?
I think Queen Kong
Queen Kong, yeah.
from,
Grenoble,
yeah.
Grenoble, yeah.
So we might meet them at the French Championships, but I'm also not sure how we are with that, if we are going with a master roster or not.
Mm-hmm.
So
Seems
we'll have
like you
to see.
might want to go for that game with the master roster, anyways.
Maybe, yeah. But I'm hoping that at London Invite we'll have enough games, and then it should be okay.
John Dock in the chat saying everybody avoid Yaka the rest of the season now. So
Yeah,
that's the one
I'm not
strategy to
surprised that
keep
he would say that.
Yaka. Yeah, so I think I like to look at this plot to see how the games are stretched out. So this green is the average score you'd need for the UCF cutoff. You see that all your games are well above that. So you did quite well. Your worst game was losing to Jinx 9-12. And your best game was beating East Block 15-8. But all of your scores are well above the cutoff, so you're very safe to qualify, I would say, as long as you can get your 10 games, and that seems to be the most difficult part of your season at the
Yeah, yeah.
moment. Okay. Let's see here. So yeah, there are a number of teams. I'm curious how many of these teams are like in 3SB's situation without that many games. So you all are away from the cutoff. Jinx is away from the cutoff of 10 games. Crit still needs to get 2 more games. East Block, I think East Block will be going to a summer tour though. Let's see here. Yes, they're going to summer tour. So East Block will get their games in that way at least. Moon Cup has their games already. I've seen your games already. Bristol has only 6 of their games. So yeah, quite a number of teams here need quite a few more games, but I assume by the end of by the August, I mean it's still only mid-May. That's the thing with the lead invite. It feels like the season's already done, but actually the season's still just kind of started. So
Yeah.
this ranking will evolve quite a bit, still more, and especially with that last weekend of summer tour, things will definitely get shaken up. Still lots to play for. Let's take a look at Troubles versus Love, which is one of the cutoffs here. So these teams have not played each other yet. They have both played catch-up, where it seems that Troubles got smashed by catch-up 15-6, and Jet Set beat them once or twice. So actually, in the mutual games, it looks like Jet Set should be the better team, but I guess it's the other games that made more of a difference here. I know Jet Set also has a lot of games in the system already, and has a big season ahead of them. You see, they're already 5-8, and I think they're still going to Windmill, and they're counting it, and they're still going to a summer tour and counting it. So Jet Set's still gonna have no clue what their ranking's going to be in the end. So they're hoping to boost themselves even higher. Smog and Woof, be interesting to see them. So again, pretty close, 39 points, 15 to 14.96. You might, people from that seen the old show and paid attention might have remembered that I thought that the cutoff was 45 points for a dead even draw, but actually I think it's 37. So this was part of Saskia correcting it for me. Um, and yeah, so yeah, but it is 37. So looking at the results, did they play each other yet? No, they haven't played each other yet. They do have a mutual opponent, Smog beating Sick 10-11 and Wolf beating Sick 15-7. So again, in that game, Sick did do better, but overall with everything, Smog still taking the narrow victory. I do see some in the chat saying the connection tool would be cool to see for 3SB, as I might have some connected games to other teams. Let's take a look at the connections tool then. Let's see. Let's got 3SB out here. So you see that they're connected to Sharks, Troubles, and Fabulous, and pretty far away from teams like this over here. So the nice thing is that the whole division is connected, but you see that some teams like 3SB don't have the strongest connection to the rest of the teams. Like if you want to compare a team like 3SB to a team like Bristol, you have to go quite some levels to get from 3SB to Bristol, like maybe 4 or 5 teams away before you get there. Okay. Paula, anything else for this ranking that you want to, any other team you want to look at, any other questions you have? Why is one team where they are?
I just quickly want to look at the who is there still, because I think when I look at the teams that are going to Windmill, it seems like a lot of them are there, but then maybe also not. Like Fabulous is going to be there. Of course, Mooncup is going to be there, but I don't think they're going to use it for points. Jinx kind of has to use it for points, same as Grut. And then there's some teams like Munich and let's see, where did I have it? Seagulls, for example. Munich, I know Love is going to go for points as well. Frizzly Bears, like, are those teams that are going to be playing for EUCS as well? I know Flame is not. So it's going to be touch and go there, I think, for some teams, whether they get enough games at Windmill or not, especially with the Swiss draw. You know, if some teams are, if you win really big at the beginning and you come there with together in like the top 8 with the more high level teams, and maybe some of the opponents that you want to play against go down earlier, then you might not meet them anymore, and that also reduces your chances of getting your games in, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we said when we started this whole thing, the most surefire way to get your games is play 2 EUF tournaments. Then you don't have to worry about that at all. So that's that is what it is. We don't know yet for sure. Teams have until the week before Windmill to count it or not. So teams, there still might be teams here that don't, like, their roster doesn't show up, but maybe they will do it. Like Seagulls, you mentioned as a question mark. They have Spring Tour and Summer Tour. They haven't written down Windmill, but maybe they'll decide that it's worth it to go for that. They haven't done it yet. And what were some other question marks you had? Fabulous, I think.
Fabulous, Flame, I think already know, and maybe Munich.
Munich is not UCS, so Munich is doing mixed for UCS. So I know that. Fabulous has Spring Tour, Vienna Spring Break, and Summer Tour at the moment on their schedule, and they already have their 11 games, and they're in the top 16. So maybe they would want to do it, maybe not. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what they're going to do. If there's any Fabulous players in the chat, feel free to look at that.
It's just, I think for me, it's also an exciting part about this season. I think next year, like you say, teams are just going to know that you have to go to 2 tournaments and you're going to be safe. But in this, like in the current season, I think it's just a little soap, to see which teams are going to make it, like to the 10 teams, and if to the 10 games. And if they don't, what are they going to do about it? Yeah. It's kind of exciting, I think.
Yeah, it's exciting. I'm sure it's making some teams nervous, but people will try to find a way. Okay, I think we can start going to some more questions from the chat. I see one from Arthur Durick saying Jet Set Love has 2 losses against Shout with different results, the same game rating. Let's take a look at that. Jet Set Love games. I'll sort by game rating. 215 and 315. Yes, these are 2 different games with the same results, but I'll have to bring up my handy little algorithm tab to show you here. So the game rating is calculated, just to remind people, your opponent's rating plus or minus a game rating difference. And that game rating difference is done by this equation here, which is a bunch of complicated math, but that doesn't matter. The point of it is that if a score of 15-14 has a game difference of 125, and the differences get smaller and smaller as the points get as it becomes more and more of a blowout, and everything from 15-7 to 15-0 counts the same as a 600 point difference towards them. So for these both of these games, it's 15-2 and 15-3. They're both within the same margin, so they both would be 600 points below Shout. So Shout has a rating of 566. You subtract 600 from that, you get negative 33.86, and that's why these are different scores but the same game rating. Hope that makes sense. Let's see. I think John Dock had a question earlier. What was it? Off-topic question. Maybe it can be answered here. But will the EUCF seedings work the same way as USA, or will there be some names and pots drawn randomly right before the event? So I don't know if this is totally finalized, but I'll announce at least the plans at the moment. At least the way I want to do it is that we would have the top 4 seeds. So the teams will be seeded by their ranking, 1 to 16. That's going to happen regardless of where the wild cards fall, regardless of anything. The top 4 seeds will be the top 4 seeds of the pool, of each pool. And then each grouping below that, so then the next 4 teams will be a single pot. Then the next 4 teams after that will be a pot. And then the next 4 teams under that will be a pot. And it'll be somewhat random. So 1 through 4 is set in, and then 5 through 8 it'll be somewhat randomly distributed as to which one are the 2 seeds. And then 9 through 12 is the same thing, and then 13 through 16 the same thing. So there'll be a pot draw for the UCF pool selection, even though the seeding is strictly based off of the ranking. Okay. Any other questions in the chat? Question here from Demi. It may have been mentioned before, but how are other wildcards awarded? So the wildcards will be awarded by winning the summer tours. So I think we can have a quick look here. Well, I thought I had it open here, but I'll just go real quick. You can click here on team announcement, form announcement, and so each summer tour, which will happen, there'll be one set of summer tours on the 3rd or 4th of August in Malmö and Birmingham. The winner of each of these tournaments will get a wild card. Again, so for example, I think it's only this case. If Lemmings wins the Birmingham tournament, then no team gets a wild card from that tournament. It just goes to a ranking spot. So Lemmings could play spoiler there, but if any other team wins that tournament, they get a wild card. Team wins here, team wins here. And then there's also these summer tours in the 17th, 18th of August. So the winner of each of these tournaments will get a wild card. And that's why you have these blue spots here that are not necessarily safe. If those teams that win the wild card are in the top 16, these blue spots will also be awarded. If some team down here wins a wild card, then the teams in blue will start to get their spots taken away. That makes sense. Demi says there's a possibility you go to Windmill, decide to count it, but none of your games get counted due to the opposition. That's correct. That's what happened at Tom's to, I believe, catch-up women. They also wanted to count it, and they got 0 games. That's the way it works. If you want to guarantee your games, go to EUF tournaments. Don't know how many times I'm going to have to say it, but I think people will get the message next year. Any other questions for the ranking or for Paula? John Kofi asking if we can turn off the birds. I think, Paula, that's on your side. You have some lovely birds.
Really? Oh.
Maybe it's my side. I'm actually not sure.
Yeah. No, I think it's my side probably. Yeah. I can close the door, but I think it's already almost time, so it's okay.
Thanks, John. All right. I think that'll do it. Paula, any final thoughts on the season? What are you excited about coming up soon?
Yeah, I think I'm just super excited about how competitive the women's division is going to be this year, and to just play a lot of tight games throughout the season, and also early in the UCF tournament to have to really fight for it. I'm just very excited for that. and I'm just curious to see what happens at the end.
We all are, and we'll keep you up to date with that. I think the next in or out episode we have planned, unless something crazy happens to the rankings, is for after Windmill. I think that's the next time we'll have enough results to make it worth doing another show. So have a bit of a break after doing a bunch of episodes in April and May. But I'm sure there'll be some nice shakeups after Talampaya. Oh, not after Talampaya. Nobody submitted rosters to that. But after Windmill, we'll take a look and see how things have moved. Thank you to Paula Boss for joining me on this show, and we'll see you soon.